Welcome back to Resistance Rangers on the Air, the show that digs beneath the official story. I'm your host, Cheyenne.
You're listening to Resistance Rangers on the Air. This podcast is produced by Resistance Rangers, a grassroots volunteer collective. The views expressed here are those of the host and guests who may or may not be current employees, speaking solely in their personal capacities. For any hosts and guests who may or may not be current employees, this is not a part of any official duties. We are not affiliated with the National Park Service, the Department of the Interior, or any other government agency. Nothing said on this podcast should be interpreted as official policy, guidance, or endorsement.
Today is Indigenous Peoples Day, a vital occasion to honor the survival, culture, and sovereignty of Indigenous nations across the continent. On today's episode, we will discuss the history of the establishment of the National Park Service and its role in the displacement of tribal nations. Throughout the episode, you will hear from Native American individuals about the significance of park lands and Indigenous Peoples Day. We're starting with a history that's often scrubbed from the glossy brochures. It's the ugly truth behind America's national parks. We often celebrate the National Park Service, founded in 1916, as America's best idea, or a victory for conservation. But for countless Indigenous nations, it was a profound act of dispossession. The idea that these incredible landscapes like Yellowstone, Yosemite, and Glacier were untouched wilderness was a powerful and deceptive myth. In reality, they were the homelands of tribes who had managed and lived on that land for millennia. To create the illusion of a pristine, human-free environment, the U.S. government violently enforced ethnic cleansing. Tribes like the Awa-Nichi in Yosemite are the various nations of the Yellowstone area, like the Crow, Shoshone, Blackfeet, and others, were systematically forcibly removed by the U.S. Army. Their traditional hunting, gathering, and sacred ceremonies were outlawed within the new park boundaries. The whole preservation movement in its early form was fundamentally dependent on the erasure of Indigenous history and presence. This is why, on Indigenous Peoples Day, it is crucial that we don't just admire the view. We remember the hidden history. This day is about recognizing more than just past injustice. It's about acknowledging the ongoing resilience and sovereignty of tribal nations. That trauma of displacement is not over. It fuels current fights for co-stewardship, access, and truth. Indigenous nations are fighting for an equal say in how their ancestral lands are managed, arguing that their traditional ecological knowledge is essential for genuine conservation. Tribes continue to push for the right to gather traditional medicines, to hunt, and hold sacred ceremonies in the parks that were stolen from them. And we're starting to see more parks finally change their narrative, or at least we were in the Biden administration, where parks were starting to acknowledge the names of the original inhabitants and the violence of their removal. The land itself is a witness. By facing this history, we honor the original stewards of the land. We honor the Indigenous peoples who never stopped fighting for their homelands. That's the real story behind America's best idea, and it's the story we all need to be telling. Up next, we hear from Kelly from the Navajo Nation on what Indigenous Peoples Day means to her.
Yat she Kelly Jones, Yenishia, Tgatnasayanishla, Kiani Bashashin, Kabanda Shache, dot the Bethlejane, Ada Chanela, Akut Ego, Dina Sanishle. Hello, my name is Kelly Jones. I am the Tango clan born for the Towering House people, and this is who I am as a Navajo woman. I am from a very small community called Rock Point in Arizona, from the Navajo Nation. And I like to thank you for allowing me to be here as part of this podcast, to have a voice, to talk about why Indigenous Peoples Day is important to be recognized. And Indigenous Peoples Day is such an important day, not just for Native people, but for everyone. It's a day to bring awareness to the non-Native community, to educate and to build understanding about the deep connection our people have to this land. Working here in a place like Grand Canyon, I meet people from all over the world. And honestly, many of them still don't realize that Native Americans are real, living people. I've been asked questions like, do you live in teepees? Or, I don't know Native people could go to college. That's why this day matters so much. It's our chance to speak truth, to show who we are, where we come from, and what we continue to stand for. Indigenous Peoples Day also means recognizing the real history, the genocide, the pain, and the survival of our ancestors. That history still isn't fully told in schools or shared with the American public. And because of that silence, stereotypes still follow us today. People say things like, Native people have high diabetes rates, or they live in poverty, but they don't understand why. Yes, some of our communities don't have running water. Yes, we face serious health issues, but that's not who we are. It's because of what was done to us. The United States took our ancestral lands, used them for profit, contaminated our water, and told us to live off what's left. Even when that water was poisoned with arsenic, that's not ancient history, that's now. And it's a reminder that the silent genocide continues in new forms every day. And even today, the federal government still recognizes this holiday as Columbus Day. That means our voices, the ones meant to bring truth, healing, and awareness, won't be heard this weekend. It's painful to know this day is still celebrated in the name of a man who brought genocide to our people. But even when our voices are silenced, our stories are still here. Our songs, our prayers, our language, they live in the wind and the water and the land itself, waiting to be heard when the time comes again. When I think about parkland, I think about connection, not just physical, but spiritual. Yes, the systems the federal government put in place make it harder for us to connect the way our ancestors did. But even so, these places are still alive. The spirits are still here. You can feel them in the plants, the animals, the rivers, the rocks. Our non-human relatives carry memory and power. These lands are not empty. They are living, breathing spaces that hold the presence of our generations who came before us. And yet, too often, the people we honor are the ones who discovered these places, not the original caretakers who have protected and nurtured this land for countless generations. When I step out here at the Grand Canyon, I feel the energy of my ancestors. It reminds me why I have a voice, why I need to keep telling the truth about these places, about their meaning to our people, about the deep history that is often ignored. I know many tribal members haven't visited, even though they live only a few hours away, and they finally do come, they cry. That's the power of this land. That's the connection we carry in our hearts and our stories and our spirits. These places are teachings to us. They remind us that the land has memory and that our people are still here. They are listening, still honoring the legacy of those who came before.
And now we'll hear from a member of the Chickasaw Nation, Riley, about the significance of Indigenous Peoples Day to her.
Hello everyone, my name is Riley Freeman, and I am a proud citizen of the Chickasaw Nation, and I'm also an Indigenous ethnoarchaeologist. To me, Indigenous Peoples Day is a day to celebrate the people whose very essence is braided into the fabric, landscape, and culture of this country. It's a recognition and celebration of how Indigenous Americans have contributed and continue to contribute to this country. It's a day where we can remember the tragedies and loss of our communities, but also an opportunity to acknowledge the ongoing struggles of our people. When I was an undergrad student in 2018, My fellow Native American Student Association members and I had the opportunity to host a powwow and cultural demonstration on the campus of the University of North Texas on Indigenous Peoples Day. It was truly a beautiful event, and what came from it was several honest discussions with students, faculty, and the university president about the importance of Indigenous Peoples Day and celebrating our Native students. We received so many questions from folks like, I thought only natives lived in Oklahoma, or I didn't know any were still alive in America. And it was one of the first times that really truly hit me that our education systems and museums and institutions have failed us. We cannot be supported, we cannot create allies if people think we are dead and gone. Across the U.S., the national parks protect many sacred landscapes and ceremonial spaces for Indigenous people. When many national parks and monuments were officially designated, Indigenous communities' access to these sacred lands were initially prohibited or restricted, and they were not allowed to collect, to hunt, to continue their traditional practices. Luckily for us, in the last several decades, many parks have created agreements with tribes that allow them to access park lands for traditional hunting or gathering or for ceremonial purposes. Institutions like the Park Service have an incredible opportunity to teach the public about past and contemporary Native communities, and at the same time, they have the opportunity to build relationships with tribes that help protect traditional cultural practices and build a dialogue on how to best be stewards of the land. Without parks and monuments, so many of our histories would fade into obscurity. Without formal acknowledgments like Indigenous Peoples Day, our Native communities lose our visibility. We lose the ability to connect with communities that are not Indigenous. We lose the ability to spread our culture. We lose the ability to help share our histories. And I believe that so many people in our contemporary society could use community, could use a reason to celebrate and a reason to come together and build a better world.
And that brings us to the end of this episode, but certainly not the end of the conversation. As we wrap up on Indigenous Peoples Day, remember that true preservation involves more than just protecting rocks and trees. It means restoring the relationship between the people and the land. So when you visit a national park next, don't just see the beauty, abundance, and grandeur, to quote the executive order that calls for censorship across the service. See the ancestral home. Ask yourself, what is the full story of this place? How can public lands best serve the needs of everyone? The work of today's Indigenous peoples, the original stewards of this land, is about moving from historical displacement to future co-stewardship. It's about ensuring that the vibrant cultures and essential knowledge of the first peoples are central to how we care for this country. Thank you to all our guests for sharing their voices and their truth. Until next time, keep resisting the easy narrative.
A note on the White House proclamation honoring Columbus Day. While President Trump may call him a hero, a giant of Western civilization, we at Resistance Rangers on the Air honor the truth. We will not celebrate Christopher Columbus. The historical record is clear. He was not an explorer, but a governor who initiated the transatlantic slave trade, systematically mutilated and murdered Indigenous people, and built his fortune on sexual violence. This is a man who was documented trafficking Native women and girls as young as 9. He didn't discover anything. He launched centuries of colonization and genocide. We reject this false narrative and propaganda. Thank you for listening to Resistance Rangers on the Air. We collect breaking news and stories from the front lines of the resistance, fact-check and filter everything through the lens of our experiences with public lands. You may not know that there are laws, rules, and traditions that have long prevented rangers and other civil servants from speaking out. Through our collective anonymity, we speak for those who can't.